The ballroom shimmered under the golden light of hundreds of crystal chandeliers. Music floated softly through the air, mingling with the low hum of laughter, clinking glasses, and the rustle of silk gowns. It was one of those nights when everything seemed perfect on the surface. Elegance, money, and power all gathered in one glittering room. The annual St. Clair Charity Ball was known for its luxury. Politicians, celebrities, business owners, and artists all came dressed in their finest. It wasn't just a night of giving. It was a night to be seen, to make connections, to whisper deals behind smiles. Among the honored guests that evening was Victor Hale, the famous concert pianist who had performed in the grandest halls around the world. His name alone was enough to draw attention. People admired him, not only for his musical brilliance but also for his charm. Yet, behind that smooth smile and tailored suit, Victor carried the confidence of someone who had stopped seeing others as equals long ago. He stood near the grand piano, a stunning black Steinway that gleamed like a mirror under the lights. Guests circled around him, eager for a word, a picture, anything. He entertained them effortlessly. Stories of tours in Paris, applause in Vienna, late-night parties in Monaco. Every sentence seemed crafted to remind everyone how extraordinary he was. Across the hall, Emily Carter moved quietly among the guests with a silver tray balanced on her hand. She wore a simple black uniform, her hair tied neatly back, her eyes focused on her work. The dress code for staff was plain and modest, designed to make them blend into the background. Emily had learned to blend in well. She had worked dozens of events like this, serving champagne and canapés to people who rarely noticed her face. But tonight felt heavier. Maybe it was because the music reminded her of something she used to love deeply, something she had locked away long ago. Every time she passed near the piano, her eyes lingered just a moment too long. The sight of it stirred a quiet ache inside her chest. She remembered the feel of smooth ivory keys under her fingertips, the thrill of losing herself in melody. Once, years ago, she had dreamed of being a pianist. Not famous, not rich, just someone who could play, teach, and live surrounded by music. But life had other plans. Her mother's illness, the bills, the endless string of jobs, it all came too fast. She had sold her old upright piano to pay rent, telling herself it was temporary. But temporary became forever. Now music was something she listened to while cleaning tables or commuting home. As she weaved through the glittering crowd, she caught snippets of conversations. "Oh, Victor, you must play something for us later. Did you hear? He's opening his own music academy next year. He's simply a genius. No one plays like him." Emily smiled politely as she offered glasses of champagne. She didn't resent Victor. She respected talent. But the tone of their admiration, the worship in their voices, made her feel small. People like Victor seemed to live in a different world, one she could only serve, never join. At the far end of the room, Victor stood with a small group near the piano. He was in his element, surrounded by people who hung on his every word. When one of the organizers approached to ask if he needed anything before his performance, he smiled with practiced grace. "I only need peace and a tuned piano," he said, running his hand along the polished lid. Then he glanced over his shoulder, noticing Emily passing by with her tray, and maybe for the staff to keep their distance from the instrument. His tone was teasing, but there was an edge to it. The nearby guests laughed lightly. Emily froze for a moment, not sure if she was supposed to respond. She hadn't even touched the piano. She had simply walked past. Victor tilted his head and smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't meant to be kind. "Careful, darling," he added, his voice just loud enough for others to hear. "You might scratch it. This isn't the kind of piano they have at diners." The laughter grew louder this time. A few guests exchanged amused looks, clearly enjoying the show. Emily felt her face heat up, but she kept her composure. Years of customer service had taught her how to swallow humiliation. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly, her voice steady, despite the sting in her chest. She turned and walked away quickly, her eyes focused on the floor, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. As she disappeared into the crowd, Victor chuckled and shrugged at his admirers. "No harm done," he said lightly. A little humor never hurt anyone, but for Emily the words clung like burrs. She retreated to a quieter corner near the serving station, pretending to check her tray. Her friend and fellow server Grace noticed her face. "What happened?" Grace asked under her breath. "Nothing," Emily said, forcing a small smile. "Just one of the guests being..." "Funny," Grace frowned. "You mean rude?" I saw him. What a jerk. Emily shrugged. It doesn't matter. Let's just get through the night. But it did matter. As she walked back into the crowd, the scene replayed in her head again and again. The laughter, the smugness, the way people looked at her like she didn't belong there. She had been invisible before, but now she wished she really was. Hours passed. The music swelled, people danced, and the scent of champagne filled the air. Victor's performance was the highlight of the evening. When he finally took the stage, the crowd hushed instantly. He sat at the piano with effortless poise, his hands hovering above the keys. Then he began to play. The notes spilled out in perfect rhythm, fast, precise, dazzling. Every arpeggio glimmered like crystal. The audience was entranced. Cameras flashed, people leaned forward, and Victor's face carried the expression of a man who knew he was admired. Emily stood near the back, watching. She couldn't deny his skill. He was incredible, every movement smooth, every sound polished. But something was missing. The music was beautiful, yes, but it felt cold, like a showpiece, like a painting you admire but can't feel. She remembered how she used to play years ago, when her hands trembled with both fear and joy. She remembered staying up late, learning a new piece until her fingers hurt, and the tiny thrill of getting it right for the first time. It wasn't about perfection then, it was about emotion. When Victor finished, the crowd erupted into applause. He stood bowed with a proud smile and basked in the glow of praise. Reporters scribbled notes, guests crowded closer to congratulate him, and for a brief moment the room revolved entirely around him. Emily turned away. She wasn't jealous, at least she told herself she wasn't. She just felt a quiet sadness. She had once wanted to live inside that kind of music. Now she carried trays and refilled glasses for people who applauded others' dreams. When the applause died down, Victor mingled once more, charming donors and laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Emily continued her rounds, pretending not to notice the sideways glances from guests who had witnessed the earlier exchange. By midnight, her feet ached, her back hurt, and her throat was dry. The event was still in full swing. Couples danced to a slow melody, soft and sweet. Near the piano, Victor stood alone for a moment, sipping champagne and watching the crowd. He looked content, maybe even smug, basking in the admiration that followed him everywhere. Emily passed nearby again, carrying empty glasses. She tried to keep her distance this time, but the piano caught her eye once more. She couldn't help it, it was a beautiful instrument. She imagined for a split second sitting there, pressing one key just to feel that familiar vibration. She didn't realize Victor had noticed her glance until he spoke again. "Still tempted?" he said with a smirk, his voice low but sharp. Emily blinked, startled. "Excuse me?" "The piano," he said, swirling the drink in his glass. "You've been staring at it all night." She hesitated. "It's a beautiful instrument. Anyone would admire it." "Anyone?" He chuckled softly. "You mean anyone who knows what it is. But tell me, do you actually play or do you just like how shiny it looks?" Emily felt her face tighten. "I used to play," she said quietly. "A long time ago?" Victor raised an eyebrow. "Used to, that's a pity. Though I suppose it's hard to practice between shifts." The tone was casual, almost playful, but the insult stung again. Emily didn't answer this time. She just turned and walked away. As she stepped into the kitchen, she exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the embarrassment. Grace looked up from arranging plates. "You okay?" Emily nodded, forcing a small laugh. "Yeah, just another night." But deep down something was stirring, something old and restless. It wasn't anger exactly. It was the ache of unspoken words, of dreams buried but not dead. She didn't know it yet, but that night would change everything. The same piano that had humiliated her would soon become the thing that lifted her back into the light. For now, she kept serving drinks, moving quietly through the glittering crowd, while the sound of soft music and shallow laughter filled the air. And somewhere deep inside her, under layers of hurt and humility, the music still lived, waiting for its chance to be heard again. The night wore on, and the ballroom only grew louder. Laughter, chatter, and the sound of clinking glasses filled the air. For most of the guests, it was the perfect evening. But for Emily, the minutes dragged like hours. Her feet ached, her shoulders burned, and her thoughts refused to quiet down. Every time she passed near the piano, she could almost hear Victor's mocking words echoing in her head. She tried to focus on her work, smiling, nodding, clearing tables, but her mind kept drifting back. She replayed that moment when everyone had laughed at her, and the sting returned. Maybe it shouldn't have bothered her so much. She was used to rude customers and arrogant guests, but something about this felt different. It wasn't just about being insulted. It was about being reminded of everything she had lost. That piano wasn't just an instrument. To her, it represented the life she'd wanted but couldn't have. The life she'd sacrificed to survive. Victor, meanwhile, was still the center of attention. He moved from group to group, laughing at jokes, shaking hands, and soaking up praise. Everyone admired him, the way he spoke, the way he dressed, even the way he held his glass. It was as if the whole room revolved around him. But beneath that perfect smile, Victor was bored. He had performed at hundreds of events like this one. The admiration had started to feel hollow years ago. He no longer played for love of music, he played for applause. He liked the attention more than the art itself. And yet, when he saw Emily earlier, something about her had irritated him. Maybe it was the way she looked at the piano, as if it meant something deeper than it did to him. He couldn't explain why it bothered him, but it did. As the clock crept toward 1 in the morning, the guests began to thin out. Some left early, others lingered for one last drink. The ballroom had lost its earlier sparkle. A few tired servers moved quietly between tables, collecting empty glasses and folded napkins. Emily helped stack plates in the kitchen. The back room felt worlds apart from the glowing ballroom. Here the air smelled of dish soap and coffee instead of perfume and wine. The laughter was replaced by clattering dishes and the low hum of exhaustion. Grace sat beside her on a stool, rubbing her sore feet. "Can you believe that guy?" she said, shaking her head. "The pianist. What's his name again? Victor?" Emily gave a small nod. "He's talented, sure," Grace went on, "but my goodness, he thinks the sun rises just to hear him play." Emily smiled faintly. "People like him live in their own world. They don't see people like us." "Still," Grace said, "you handled it well. If it were me, I'd have dumped the champagne on his fancy shoes." That made Emily laugh, a soft, tired laugh. "Then you'd be out of a job," she said. Grace shrugged. "Maybe, but I'd go out proud." They both laughed quietly. But as the sound faded, Emily's smile lingered only for a moment. Her thoughts drifted again, to a time when her life had been filled with music. She remembered the small music room she used to practice in, back at her old school. The smell of polished wood, the echo of her mistakes bouncing off the walls. She remembered her teacher, an old man with gentle eyes who used to say, "Don't play to impress, Emily. Play to feel." She had taken those words to heart once, but now they felt like a distant echo. She sighed and stood up, ready to head back into the ballroom for the final round of cleanup. Inside, Victor was standing by the bar, talking to a group of guests. He looked relaxed, confident, perfectly at ease. But when his eyes met hers from across the room, he looked away almost instantly, as if dismissing her from existence. Emily returned to her work, gathering glasses from nearby tables. As she leaned to pick one up near the piano, she caught a faint reflection of herself in its shiny black surface. It startled her. She looked older than she remembered, more tired. Maybe it was the lighting, or maybe it was the years of pushing dreams aside. A guest approached her suddenly, placing an empty glass on her tray. "You know," the woman said kindly, "you were very professional earlier." Emily blinked in surprise. "Thank you." "I saw what he said," the woman whispered, glancing toward Victor. "That was uncalled for. You handled it with grace. Some people think money gives them manners. It doesn't." Emily smiled awkwardly. "I appreciate that, ma'am." The woman nodded and walked away. It was a small kindness, but it warmed Emily's chest. Maybe not everyone in that room looked down on her. Just then, Victor's voice carried through the crowd again, loud enough to draw attention. He was telling another story, something about a concert in Paris where the president had personally congratulated him. People laughed and clapped. It was his favorite kind of audience. Emily rolled her eyes softly and moved toward the kitchen again. She was almost done for the night when she heard a sharp sound like feedback from a speaker. The music stopped abruptly. Guests looked around in confusion. A technician ran across the room toward the sound system. "We've got a short," he said to the event coordinator. "Something blew out. The backup's not responding." The coordinator looked panicked. We can't have silence. People are still here. Victor, of course, looked annoyed. Well, he said with a smirk, perhaps silence will do them some good. They might finally learn to appreciate it. The coordinator ignored him and turned to the staff. Does anyone here know how to play? We just need some background music until the system's fixed. Anything gentle just to fill the space. No one responded. Most of the staff avoided eye contact. They just wanted the night to end. But Grace, standing beside Emily, looked at her with a mischievous glint. She can, Grace said suddenly, pointing toward Emily. Emily's eyes widened. What? You play piano, Grace said. You told me once. That was years ago, Emily whispered, shaking her head. No way, but the coordinator had already heard. You play? I used to, Emily said quickly. I'm not perfect, the coordinator interrupted. We just need something soft. Please help us out. Just a few minutes until we fix the sound system. Before Emily could protest again, the coordinator had already guided her toward the piano. Heads began to turn. Victor, watching from a few feet away, looked amused. Oh, this should be interesting, he murmured. Emily's stomach twisted. She hadn't touched a piano in years. Her fingers felt stiff just thinking about it. But as she stood there in front of the grand instrument, she felt something deep inside her stir. A mix of fear, longing, and courage. Go on, Grace whispered behind her. You've got this. Emily looked at her, then at the crowd. Some were watching curiously, others whispering to each other. The embarrassment from earlier came rushing back. What if she messed up? What if she looked foolish again? Then she thought of something her old teacher had told her once. Music doesn't belong to the rich or the gifted. It belongs to anyone who feels it. She took a slow breath and sat down. The bench felt cool beneath her. Her fingers hovered over the keys. For a second, the whole room seemed to fade away. The laughter, the whispers, the chandeliers. All that existed was her and the piano. She pressed one key. The sound was clear, warm, familiar. It sent a shiver through her arms. Then another key, then another. Softly at first, uncertain, like testing old wings. People began to quiet down. Conversations stopped. Even Victor's smirk faltered a little. Emily's hands began to move with more confidence. A melody formed, gentle, flowing, full of feeling. It wasn't a showpiece, it wasn't practiced perfection, it was real. Every note carried a story, a memory, a piece of her heart that had been silent for too long. The music filled the room, wrapping around the guests like a soft breeze. Some closed their eyes. Others stood frozen, watching her in disbelief. The waitstaff peeked from the corners, smiling faintly. Grace grinned proudly. Victor stood still, his glass forgotten in his hand. He wanted to dismiss it, to find some flaw, but he couldn't. The way she played, it was raw, emotional, honest. It was the kind of music he hadn't felt in years. When the final note faded into silence, the room stayed still for a moment, as if no one dared breathe. Then the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder until the entire ballroom erupted in claps and cheers. Emily sat there, stunned. Her heart raced, her eyes glistened. She hadn't expected that reaction. She hadn't expected anything at all. The coordinator rushed over, beaming. That was incredible. Thank you. Guests surrounded her, offering compliments. That was beautiful. You're amazing. Where did you learn to play like that? Emily smiled shyly, overwhelmed. Thank you, she kept saying, her voice small but full of gratitude. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Victor watching her. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between surprise and discomfort. For once, the spotlight wasn't his. As the guests continued to clap, Victor turned away, pretending to fix his cufflinks. But deep down, something inside him shifted, a crack in the shell of pride he'd built around himself. Emily, still at the piano, took one last look at the keys before standing up. Her hands trembled slightly, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from the rush of having found herself again, even just for a few minutes. As she walked back toward the kitchen, Grace met her halfway, eyes wide with pride. You did it, she whispered. You really did it. Emily smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. I just played to feel. Neither of them knew it yet. But that small moment, those few minutes of courage, would change everything that came after. The crowd still talked about her as she slipped quietly out of sight, the soft echo of her music lingering in the air long after the last note had faded. The sound of applause still echoed faintly in Emily's ears long after it ended. Even as she stood backstage, away from the crowd, she could feel the rush in her chest, the kind of warm trembling that comes when something inside you wakes up after being asleep for too long. She hadn't planned any of it. She hadn't meant to play, and yet now that she had, she couldn't stop replaying that moment in her head. The hush of the ballroom, the feel of the keys beneath her fingers, the look on people's faces when they listened. Grace was still beaming when she joined her near the kitchen doors. "You were unbelievable out there," she said, barely keeping her voice down. "Everyone's still talking about it." Emily smiled shyly. "I didn't even know what I was doing," she admitted. "I just played something I remembered." "Well, whatever you did, you made half the guests tear up," Grace said. "Even the rich ones with the shiny watches." Emily laughed softly, but her heart still felt heavy with disbelief. She didn't think people would care that much. She didn't think anyone would even notice. But they had. For a brief moment, she hadn't been invisible. She had been seen. In the ballroom, the sound system finally came back to life. Music began playing again, and people slowly returned to their conversations. Yet every few minutes, someone new came up to the piano, still talking about the waitress who played. Victor stood at the bar, silent. He hadn't joined in the clapping. He had stood there through the entire performance, arms folded, expression unreadable. Inside, something uncomfortable stirred. He told himself it didn't matter, that she'd just been lucky, that the guests were only reacting to the surprise of it all. But the truth was, he knew better. He had recognized something in her playing that he hadn't felt in years. The way she played. It wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about skill or fame. It was about emotion, something he had lost long ago in the chase for perfection. Still, his pride wouldn't let him admit that. Not even to himself. When the event finally came to an end, the guests began to leave, chattering excitedly. A few of them even tried to ask the organizers for Emily's name. The host, surprised by all the attention, asked one of the staff to bring her out to meet them. But Emily had already slipped away. She was in the back hallway, untying her apron. Her hands still trembled, not from nerves now, but from excitement. For the first time in years, she felt alive. As she stepped out into the cool night air after her shift, the city lights glittered across the streets. The night was calm, with only the faint hum of traffic in the distance. She wrapped her thin jacket tighter around herself and began walking home. Her apartment wasn't far, just a few blocks away, but every step felt lighter than usual. She couldn't stop smiling. When she got home, she sat by the small window and looked out over the quiet street. The apartment was small and old, but she didn't mind. It had always been her little corner of peace. She made herself a cup of tea, then sat down, staring at her hands. Her fingers still remembered the keys, the rhythm, the touch, the flow. It amazed her how natural it had felt even after so many years. She whispered softly to herself, "Maybe I can still play." The thought scared her and thrilled her at the same time. The next morning, Emily woke to a string of messages from her coworkers. Grace had sent several in a row. "You're trending online. Someone filmed your performance. You have to see this." Emily's heart skipped. She quickly opened her phone and found a video clip posted by a guest from the event. The title read, "Waitress Surprises Everyone at Charity Ball." It already had thousands of views. In the video, she saw herself walking nervously to the piano, then playing with her eyes half closed, completely lost in the music. The comments below were full of praise. "She plays better than the professional." Such pure emotion. This is what music should sound like. Emily didn't know what to feel. Part of her was overwhelmed. This kind of attention was completely new. Another part of her felt embarrassed. She hadn't played to impress anyone. She had played because, for one fleeting moment, she wanted to feel alive again. Meanwhile, across town, Victor sat in his high-rise apartment, scrolling through his phone. He saw the same video and his jaw tightened. The headline hit him harder than he expected. He played it once, then again. The way she played haunted him. There was something effortless in it, something real. He didn't want to admit it, but her performance had moved him more than anything he'd played himself in years. But instead of admiration, he felt irritation. He told himself it was unfair that someone like her with no fame or training for years could steal the spotlight so easily. "A waitress," he muttered bitterly, tossing his phone onto the couch. He poured himself a drink and sat in silence. For the first time in a long while, the applause in his memory didn't sound satisfying. It sounded empty. Over the next few days, the video continued to spread. Local news stations mentioned it briefly. People on social media began to ask who the mysterious pianist was. Some said she should be given a chance to perform again. Back at the hotel, the manager called Emily in before her next shift. "That performance of yours," he said with a smile. "It's all over the internet. The hotel's getting great publicity. You made us look good?" Emily nodded politely, unsure what to say. "Thank you, sir," he chuckled. "Don't thank me, thank yourself. You've got talent, young lady. If I were you, I'd take this moment and do something with it. You might not get another chance like this." His words stayed with her long after she returned to work. Maybe he was right. Maybe it wasn't too late to try again. That evening, as she finished her shift, Victor walked in unexpectedly. He had been invited to a follow-up dinner meeting with some of the event organizers. When he saw Emily working again, he hesitated for a moment. Then pride straightened his back and he approached her. She noticed him right away, her heart tightening slightly. The last time they'd spoken, he had embarrassed her in front of everyone. Now she wasn't sure what to expect. "Miss Carter," he said coolly, setting his glass down on the bar. "You certainly caused quite a stir the other night." Emily turned toward him. "I didn't mean to," she said simply. "They asked me to play. I just wanted to help." He studied her face. She looked calm, not boastful or proud, just sincere. It made him uneasy. "Help," he repeated as if testing the word. "Well, congratulations. You've become famous for a day." There was something sharp in his tone, but she didn't rise to it. "I don't care about fame," she said softly. "I just care about music." That answer silenced him. For a moment, they stood there quietly, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Finally, Victor broke the silence. "You should come to my studio sometime," he said, surprising even himself. "If you're serious about playing again, I could offer some guidance." Emily hesitated. She didn't know if it was an insult or an invitation. "Thank you," she said after a pause. "But I think I'll manage." Victor blinked. He wasn't used to being turned down. "You think you can make it on your own?" "I'm not trying to make it," she said gently. "I'm just trying to find what I lost." There was no arrogance in her voice, no anger either. Just truth. Victor looked at her for a long moment, then gave a small, almost respectful nod before walking away. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Her mind kept spinning with possibilities. She hadn't touched a piano seriously in years, and yet the idea of playing again filled her with excitement. She went online and looked for local music schools, small community centers, anywhere she could practice. Most were expensive, but she found one nearby that allowed open sessions for a small hourly fee. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The next day, after finishing her morning shift, she took the bus across town. The building was old and quiet, with peeling paint and the faint smell of wood polish. Inside there was a single upright piano. She sat down, her heart racing. Her fingers touched the keys gently, almost afraid. Then she began to play. The sound was rough at first, uneven and rusty. But as the minutes passed, the old rhythm returned. Her hands moved more freely. Her eyes closed. The music flowed again. Tears pricked her eyes, not of sadness, but relief. She had missed this more than she'd ever realized. Back at his apartment, Victor practiced too. But every time he sat at his grand piano, he found himself thinking about her. About that look on her face when she played, not pride, not performance, just pure connection. He hated that he couldn't shake it. For years, he had believed that technical skill was everything, but now he wasn't so sure. Both of them, in their separate corners of the city, sat by their pianos that night, one rediscovering her love for music, the other questioning what it truly meant. Neither of them knew that their paths would cross again soon. And when they did, everything they believed about music, pride, and heart would be tested. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly settled back into its quiet rhythm. But for Emily, everything felt different now. Every spare moment she had, she spent at the small community music room she had found. The piano there wasn't fancy. Some of the keys stuck and the sound was a little flat, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she could play again. After work, she would go there for an hour or two, still wearing her black uniform, her hair tied back. At first, she played simple pieces, the ones she remembered from her school days, but soon her fingers began to find their strength again. The notes came more naturally, the melodies deeper and fuller. The caretaker of the place, an older woman named Mrs. Reynolds, often stopped to listen. "You play with feeling," she said one evening. "Not many do that anymore," Emily smiled. "It's been a long time," she replied. "Doesn't sound like it," Mrs. Reynolds said with a grin. "You should think about performing again." "People need to hear this," Emily laughed softly. "I'm not ready for that." But part of her wondered if maybe she could be someday. Meanwhile, across the city, Victor was struggling. His upcoming concert tour was supposed to be his biggest in years, but rehearsals weren't going well. He played flawlessly as always, but something about his music felt hollow. Even to him. His manager noticed it too. "You're technically perfect," the man said one afternoon, "but it feels like you're just repeating notes. Where's the passion, Victor?" Victor didn't have an answer. He had practiced his whole life to be the best, to be admired, to never make mistakes. But lately that wasn't enough. Every time he sat at the piano, he remembered that night at the charity ball, the way the waitress had played with such raw honesty. It bothered him how much it had affected him. Finally, one morning, he found himself searching for her name online. The video was still everywhere, though most people didn't know much about her. There were comments asking, "Who is she?" And "She deserves a record deal." Victor clicked through pages trying to find any trace of her, until he finally saw an article mentioning the hotel she worked at. He didn't know why, but he decided to go there again. When he walked through the doors, some of the staff recognized him instantly, whispering among themselves. But he ignored the attention and went straight to the bar where Emily was wiping down glasses. She looked up, startled to see him. "Mr. Hale," she said politely, "can I get you something?" He hesitated before speaking. "Actually," he said quietly, "I came to talk." Emily blinked, surprised. "To talk?" "Yes," he said, "about the other night. And about your music." She glanced around, unsure if he was serious. "I thought you already made your opinion clear," she said carefully. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice lower now. "I misjudged you." It was strange hearing those words from him. He didn't sound arrogant this time. He looked tired, maybe even sincere. "I've been playing since I was a child," he continued. "But that night when you played, it reminded me of something I forgot. Why I started in the first place." Emily didn't know what to say. "I just played what I felt," she said softly. "And that's exactly it," he replied. "You played what you felt. I play what I think." "There's a difference." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Victor said, "I have a rehearsal studio across town. Come by tomorrow. I want you to play something there. No audience, no pressure. Just music." Emily hesitated. "Why me?" He smiled faintly. "Because I think you have something I lost." She didn't agree right away. It took her most of the night to decide. She wasn't sure if he was serious or if this was some kind of test. But deep down, a small voice inside her whispered that maybe this was meant to happen. Maybe this was her chance to step back into the world she'd left behind. The next afternoon, she arrived at the studio. It was a quiet, sunlit space filled with instruments and recording equipment. A grand piano sat in the center, shining under the light. Victor was already there, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee. "You came," he said, almost sounding surprised. "I said I would," she replied. He motioned toward the piano. "Go ahead. Play whatever you want." Emily sat down and ran her fingers lightly over the keys. It had been years since she touched such a beautiful instrument. She took a breath, closed her eyes, and began to play a soft, flowing melody. It wasn't from any book or composer, just something from her heart. Victor stood still, listening. The notes filled the room like sunlight through open curtains. Every sound carried warmth and life. When she finished, there was a quiet pause. "That," Victor said finally, "is what real music sounds like." Emily smiled slightly. "You play differently," she said. "Yours is powerful, perfect. Mine's just simple." He shook his head. "Yours is honest. Mine is practiced." From that day, they began meeting every few days. At first, Victor just listened while she played. Then slowly, they began to play together, two very different styles blending into one. He taught her some of his techniques. She reminded him to feel instead of perform. Over time, something changed between them. Not romance, but respect. They began to understand each other through music. For Victor, Emily became a mirror. Through her, he saw the emptiness in his own path. For Emily, Victor became a bridge, someone who could open doors she thought were closed forever. One evening after a long session, Victor leaned back and said, "You should perform again." Not as a waitress, not as a guest on a real stage. Emily laughed nervously. "That's impossible. No one would come to hear me." "They will," he said firmly. "You've already touched thousands online. You just don't see it yet." He offered to help her prepare a small recital, a charity event just like the one where they met. But this time she would be the performer. The idea scared her. But it also excited her. Weeks passed as they practiced together. Victor pushed her to believe in herself, even when she doubted every note. There were days she wanted to give up, convinced she wasn't good enough, but he wouldn't let her. "Perfection isn't the goal," he told her one night. "Connection is." On the day of the performance, Emily stood backstage, her hands shaking slightly. The small auditorium was full. Many of the people from the hotel were there, along with local musicians and even a few reporters. Victor gave her a reassuring nod. "You've got this," he said quietly. When she walked onto the stage, the lights felt blinding. For a moment, her breath caught. But then she saw the piano waiting for her in the center. The same feeling she had that night at the ballroom washed over her again. Calm, focus, and something deeper. She sat down and began to play. This time, it wasn't nerves or fear guiding her. It was freedom. Her music poured out like a story. Every note carried pieces of her life. The struggle, the pain, the hope, the rediscovered joy. The audience listened in silence, moved. Some even wiped tears from their eyes. When she finished, there was a moment of quiet awe, then thunderous applause. Victor, standing in the wings, smiled proudly. For once, he didn't feel jealous. He felt inspired. After the show, people crowded around Emily, congratulating her, asking for interviews, wanting to know her story. She answered humbly, overwhelmed but happy. Victor approached her after the crowd thinned out. "You did it," he said simply. She looked at him, smiling. "No," she replied softly. "We did." He shook his head. "You found it again. I just reminded you where to look." Later that night, after everyone left, Emily sat alone at the piano. The hall was empty now, but she didn't mind. She pressed one key, listening to its soft echo fade into the stillness. She thought about how far she had come, from serving drinks in that grand ballroom to standing on this stage, playing her heart out. It felt unreal, but also right. Victor joined her quietly, sitting beside her. "You know," he said, "you taught me something too." She looked at him curiously. "What's that?" "That music isn't about control," he said. "It's about surrender. You can't force it, you have to let it speak," she smiled. "Sounds like you're learning to feel again." He chuckled softly. "Maybe I am." For a while they just sat there, the silence between them comfortable. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, and for the first time in a long while, both of them felt peace. Emily had found her way back to the music she loved. Victor had found his way back to the heart he had lost, and neither of them would ever be the same again. The days after the performance felt almost unreal for Emily. It was as if her whole life had suddenly changed overnight. People she had never met were sending her messages online, praising her music and asking when she would play again. Someone from a local radio station even called the hotel to request an interview. At first, she didn't know how to react. For years, she had lived quietly, keeping her dreams tucked away behind a polite smile and long work shifts. Now suddenly, the world wanted to hear her story. She still showed up to work at the hotel the next morning, even though everyone there told her she didn't have to. The manager clapped when she walked in and said, "You made us proud, kid." The other waiters grinned, whispering about how someone famous had been working right beside them all along. Emily smiled and thanked them, but deep down she felt humbled. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight. She just wanted to play music, not chase fame.